Discreetly tucked away behind a leafy exterior, Portugal's National Tile Museum is a treasure trove of uniquely Portuguese art, history, and culture. The simple austerity of the museum's facade belies its riches within. The 16th century former convent, founded in 1509 by the Queen of Portugal, Eleanor of Aragon, is home to one of the largest and most exquisite ceramic collections in the world, all of which are distinctly Portuguese. I had the privilege and pleasure of learning about the museum and its spectacular collection from its director, Alexander Pais.
People think that azulejo comes from the word azul, blue, because of the blue and white, but no, it's a mistake. So, because azulejo, it's a word that comes from from the Arabic. Its meaning is polished stone, and so it was the denomination of the mosaics, the Roman mosaics they found in North Africa. The Islamic people who occupied North Africa, and so they call it to the Roman mosaics azulejo, and that's why the use of the word azulejo. This panel, that is the jewel of the museum, it's an exhibition of Lisbon before the earthquake that destroyed the city in the mid-18th century. It's called the Lisbon Panorama, and we are depicted here. So this is the building where today is the museum. And this building was chosen to be the Museum of Azulejo because of its collection of azulejos that were placed all over the place. So it was an ancient convent with a lot of azulejos from the 16th to the 18th century. So it's a very important building for that matter. And so it was the rightful place to have the Museum of Azulejo. Azulejo, it's probably the most identitary art of Portuguese culture. Why? Because no other country, no other culture use the azulejo as the Portuguese used. Because you have cultures that use the azulejo long before the Portuguese. So in North Africa, you have countries who use azulejo. But the difference is, in Portugal, we use azulejo since the late 15th century, but we use it always in different ways. As time goes by, like the song, as time goes by, the use of azulejo changes. There are differences in understanding and aesthetic in the use. Even today, we are facing a new revolution in the use of azulejo. Young artists are using azulejos in different ways today, and using contemporary expressions like images from computers to images from urban art in the azulejo. So it's interesting because azulejo in Portugal is always adjusting to new concepts, to new aesthetics, to new demanding of the people, of the Portuguese. And so through azulejos you can feel and you can have a glimpse of what it is to be Portuguese and what is our sensitivity, our way of living, and even our history. And so it's a very good tour through the azulejos, and you have almost all the history of Portugal told, not by the images, but by the way it's used. Azulejos had different adaptations according with the time they were used. In the 16th century, the azulejos came from Spain. In the first 3 quarters of the century, they came from Spain. But in Spain, because these azulejos were geometrical, they were used as patterns, to create patterns in the walls. In Portugal, they were used in a more architectural way. the pattern was not that important. They use it to create different motifs, to create like tapestries, imitations of stained glass windows. And so azulejo was used in a more architectural concept. It was used as a fake architecture in the architecture. So this was the concept more or less in the 16th century, when the Portuguese were trying to adapt, to adjust to azulejo and to understand its potentiality. The 17th century, probably the most important element is the patterns. There are a lot of creation of patterns in azulejo, and these patterns, even today, we are finding new patterns. We have more than 1,000 patterns already identified, but there are always appearing new patterns. And this is interesting because it shows a very rich production, a lot of imagination to create these patterns, and it gives you an idea of how they were used in the architecture. They fill the architecture all over the place, in the ceilings, in the walls. And so if you imagine big buildings, you need to have large patterns to put in the ceilings. So you have very interesting perspectives with the azulejo in the 17th century. In the 18th century, azulejo became narrative. You have buildings, religious or no, with a lot of panels with stories of mythology, religious stories, daily life stories. And so it's the moment when azulejo and the architecture become like books to tell stories. The 19th century is the moment azulejo came from the street, for the street. So for the first time they start to be used in the streets, in the facades of the buildings. So it changes the perspective we have of the city, because it gives more shine, more color. It changes the architecture, so it's a different concept. Azulejo is used in the city, in the daily life. You can see it in the city. The 20th century, azulejo becomes an art for the public, so it becomes more political, and it becomes used in the new city that is building the more modern cities. So our manifestation of art is more centered in the 20th century, is more centered in azulejo. In other countries it's the sculpture, other manifestations, but in Portugal it's more azulejo. This piece is from one of probably the most important artists from the second half of the 20th century in Portuguese azulejos. Important not for, because they are very important artists, but this is the main ceramist, the main artist of ceramics in Portugal in this period. He was called Querubim Lapa. So he was a teacher of ceramics, and an artist who discovered and deal with different glazes in a very, very specific way. And so you have this amazing panel that is a panel that is a copy of a panel that you can find in Brazil, and you can feel it. Although it's almost abstract, but you can feel it, something of Brazil in it. You can feel the sun, you can feel the warmth, you can feel the water of Brazil. So it's a very beautiful piece, and it captures the identity of the country where it was meant to. And so only a very good artist can make something like that. 21st century, azulejo is changing. The language we start to see, it's more connected with urban art expressions, but we don't know where this will lead us. But we'll see. We are here to see. Probably not to see, but by the end of this century, we'll start to understand where azulejo was taken and where grasped the identity of the 21st century. So it's a very interesting way, this adjusting, this melting and adaptation of the country and the times.
If you enjoyed this video and are interested in culture and our human condition, why not subscribe? You would make our day.